Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 306 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 13 of The Brick Wall. And here we go. There were a lot of congratulations from the crowd. It took some time for things to die down enough for Carson and Lydia to consider walking back home. Even Jake, when he came over, beamed with a wide smile, which only Carson and Lydia would think was insincere, and gave him a big double handshake. Carson smiled back. He wanted Jake to think he was at least partly blind to his machinations. Carson had no doubt that Jake would make the next two fights as hard or harder. Lydia clung to him when Jake was there, making a reasonable facsimile of a pleasant smile when Jake extended a hand to shake. Bill, too, congratulated him, though Carson noted that he made sure to give his condolences to Walt first to maintain his neutrality among Jake's boxers. "We'll talk tomorrow," Bill said in his ear before he left for the night. Lydia and Carson left arm in arm and walked home. It wasn't until they were well away from the gym before Lydia felt comfortable enough to speak. "You were amazing," she said, "but for a long time I was so worried. It felt like you were losing bit by bit. I take it you found your method to unleash yourself?" "I did," Carson replied. He briefly described it to her. "I guess that makes as much sense as anything," she said. "If I had one thing to blame for killing 3 people close to me, it would make a powerful motivator." "Yeah, I hope it works in the next one as well." "Me too, love. I had a look at the judges' scorecards. Of course, they don't mean anything now. But they saw what I saw and what you must have felt. You were far behind on the cards, hardly winning a single round. And that was with honest judges, or at least Bill said so. I think Bill's been straight with you. I wonder what Jake will come up with next time." "No idea," Carson said. "He'll have to look outside his own stable. I've beaten his best. No way he'll have me fight one of his other heavyweights. He could get anyone." They finished their walk in silence. When they got home, they checked to see the damage he had suffered. For the most part, it was the same bruises and scrapes as his earlier matches, though there were more of them, as the fight had gone so long. Worst of all was that one of his molars was loose. He hoped they would tighten up before the next fight, or he might lose it. He'd have to find out how long he had before his next fight. He'd ask Bill in the morning. He and Lydia kissed, but he found he was too exhausted to make love. He whispered his affection for her and fell asleep. He met Bill the next morning. Jake was nowhere to be seen. "Nice to see you unleashed yourself," Bill said without greeting or other preamble. "Mind if you tell me how?" Carson described what had happened and how he'd envisioned his opponent as the smallpox that had taken his family. "Can you do it again?" Bill asked. "I think so," Carson said, shrugging. Really, he didn't know. "How do you feel?" Bill asked. "Not too bad," Carson said. "Bruised. Loosened a tooth." "Yeah, that'll happen," Bill said. "Don't exercise any today, just rest up." "When's my next fight?" Carson asked. "You can fight as much as once a week, but I wouldn't recommend it," Bill said. "First of all, you haven't been put up for a fight. A lot of excitement builds up, so usually at least 2 weeks between fights, and I wouldn't recommend less than 3 weeks, or preferably more, when you have a long, tough fight like you had. You gotta have time to recover after your win." "Speaking of," Bill said, "the gate shares. You won, so 3 shares. It was a good night, $8.20 a share, so here's $24.60. He handed it out to Carson, who took it. "Excellent," Carson said. "I'll need it to pay Jake's gym fees." His heart sank a little, though, knowing that even a win would barely keep his finances afloat if there was a month between fights. "You think about when you want to fight next," Bill said. "We'll see what we can work out with Jake." Carson nodded. "Thanks, Bill. Anything else?" Not just now," Bill replied. Carson waved his hand as a goodbye as he turned and headed for the door. He went back to Lydia, and over her day off they discussed things. Despite his tooth, he figured he could fight 3 weeks out. He let Bill know, but that Wednesday Jake pulled his next trick. Carson wasn't expecting to hear his name called, but when the heavyweight names were called, he heard a name he didn't recognize, Tommy Two-Shot Coates, followed by his name. But he didn't feel shock or even anger. It made sense. Jake was trying to win their bet, and if Carson wanted 3 weeks to recover, he would see to it he would get less. He waited for the gym to clear out and went to Bill to see what he could learn. Jake found him quick, Bill said. Wonder what he offered him. Coates usually fights bigger than the local gyms. So he's good, Carson said. He's really good, Bill said. I don't like you fighting someone like that quite yet. We bring people up gradually for a reason. Carson shook his head. I'll be ready. When he tried to leave, he was stopped by a young woman. He didn't know her, but had seen her around the fights. She stood out as one of only a few women who showed. Apparently she was a boxing fan, as only the real fans were there for the match announcements. Fans and gamblers. She seemed almost shy. Mr. Carson Brax? Yes, he asked, a little amused by this formality. May I have your autograph? She asked. She held up a little book, already opened to one of the interior pages, and a pen. That's a first, he said, and took the book into his hand. He could tell she was looking at the bruises on his forearms and face. It didn't really bother him. He wrote his name and tried to hand it back to her. Would you also put your nickname, the Brick Wall, please? I try to get the boxers' nicknames, too, he chuckled. Of course. I guess I should get used to writing it that way. He added the words and then, amused, did a quick sketch of a brick wall with some simple lines. There you go. Great, the woman said, and smiled as she saw the sketch. Nice touch. And your fight last Saturday was really something. I was so impressed you were able to come back like that. Thanks, said Carson. Have a good day. He opened the gym door and stepped outside, heading back home, and thinking about what this nascent fame might mean. And that's the story for this week. It was fun to write. It's one of those in-between bits where I have to come up with the sort of like the transition from one part of the story to the next. So it was actually even shorter than this. And then this morning I came up with the idea of having the first autograph request. So I hope you enjoyed it. It was still pretty short even with that. And that is how the writing goes sometimes. And I'm still enjoying writing it. I really like these characters and Carson's story. I'm still looking forward to writing more of it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words of music, copyright 2023, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.